I was simply reading a book alone in my room when, all of a sudden, my straight friend Jason walked in. And what he did next will truly shock you. This all happened 2 weeks ago. The afternoon sun filtered through the gauzy curtains of my bedroom, painting lazy streaks of golden light across the floor and the rumpled sheets of my bed. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that only ever settled into a house during that sliver of time when the world outside seemed to pause. No traffic hum, no voices echoing from the living room. Just the steady whirl of the ceiling fan above me and the soft rustle of paper every time I turned a page. I was curled into the corner of my bed, half sitting against a pillow propped against the wall, my legs stretched out under the blanket. The novel I was reading had me in a trance. Some angsty love story full of yearning and unspoken glances. Exactly the kind of thing I would never admit out loud to enjoying. I liked it because it let me feel things in secret, emotions buried too deep to voice, scenarios too dangerous to wish for. I turned another page and the main character confessed something to his best friend. Something I knew I never would. Not in real life. Not to him, Jason. My heart gave a dull, involuntary thud at just the thought of his name. My best friend since high school, the guy I shared this small apartment with, the guy who had zero clue what he meant to me and who never gave me any reason to think he should. Jason was straight. Beautifully, hopelessly straight, athletic, popular. Constantly swiping on dating apps and bouncing between flings like it was a hobby. And yet, despite all that, he was thoughtful. The kind of guy who noticed when I hadn't eaten and brought me takeout. The kind of guy who sat next to me during finals week, talking nonsense just to distract me from my stress. The kind of guy who didn't know he occupied too many pages in the chapters of my inner world. I was mid-sentence, eyes skating along the page, when I heard the unmistakable sound of keys jangling at the front door. My chest instinctively tightened. A second later came the low thump of the door closing, followed by a familiar voice calling out, "Yo, you home?" I froze, my eyes locked on the word confession in the middle of the page. I didn't answer right away. Maybe he'd think I was asleep. Maybe. "Hello." His voice came again, closer now. Footsteps padded down the hallway, a little uneven, like he'd kicked off his sneakers as soon as he came inside. "I know you're here. Your book's on the counter." I couldn't help the small smile that curved my lips. He always noticed everything. A second later, my door creaked open without a knock. Typical Jason. And there he was, standing in the doorway with his usual half-grin, wearing joggers and a white tank top that clung a little too perfectly to his frame. His hair was messy, as if he'd run a hand through it a few times instead of actually bothering to style it. I hated how effortlessly attractive he was, how just seeing him could send a subtle jolt through me like static. "You really need to learn how to lock your door," he said, stepping in like he owned the place. I looked up from my book, the corner of my mouth twitching. "You ever consider knocking?" He flopped down onto my bed, the mattress dipping beneath his weight. His thigh pressed lightly against mine, and I had to fight the urge to shift away. Not because I didn't want the contact, but because I didn't trust myself to handle it. Jason stretched out his legs, yawned, and said, "Nah, I like to keep you on your toes. You're going to scare the life out of me one of these days." "I already do. Admit it." His voice was teasing, light-hearted as always. But there was a look in his eyes, something unreadable that hovered just under the surface of that boyish charm. I tried to ignore it and return to my book, hoping he'd get bored and leave soon. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned in, trying to read over my shoulder. "What's this one about?" "Another tragic romance." I sighed and tilted the book away from him. "None of your business." "Ooh, secret shame. That means it's juicy." "Jason," I started. But then he plucked the book from my hands and held it up, squinting dramatically at the cover. "Summer by the Lake. Sounds steamy." "It's not," I said, reaching for it. "Give it back." He laughed, letting me take it. But when our hands touched, even for that fleeting second, something sparked in my chest. It wasn't a new feeling, it happened every time. But this time I didn't recover as quickly. My hand lingered for half a beat too long, and I pulled it back abruptly, embarrassed. Jason watched me quietly for a moment. "You okay?" I nodded, staring down at the book in my lap. He laid back then, arms folded behind his head, eyes on the ceiling. You're always in here reading. Don't you ever get bored of being alone? I'm not alone, I murmured. Jason tilted his head toward me. Yeah, but I mean alone. I didn't answer right away. I didn't know how. What did he want me to say? That being alone was easier than facing the truth? That silence didn't ask questions I didn't want to answer? Books don't judge, I said eventually. He smiled faintly. But they don't touch you either. My heart skipped. The words weren't even meant to be loaded. At least I didn't think they were. But the way he said them, soft and almost reflective, made my skin flush with heat. I couldn't meet his eyes. You're weird sometimes, I muttered. He chuckled, rolling onto his side to face me. So are you. That's why we're friends. Jason's arm brushed mine as he adjusted himself. And I tried not to react, but I could feel every inch of my body tense, every cell buzzing. He was too close, too warm, too real. And then, quietly, almost too softly to hear, he said, "Do you ever think about things being different?" I turned to look at him. His gaze was locked on mine, more serious than I'd ever seen it. Different? How? I asked. He shrugged, but the gesture felt forced. I don't know, just not like this. I felt like I was holding my breath. There was a current running between us now, one we danced around for years but never named. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but he sat up abruptly, ruffling his hair like he was trying to shake something loose from his thoughts. I'm starving. Do we have snacks? And just like that, the moment passed, or rather, he let it pass. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at me when he asked that question, about how my pulse had quickened, my throat had tightened. Jason stood and walked toward the kitchen, leaving the door open behind him. I was still frozen on the bed, staring at the place where he'd just been, my heart racing, the book forgotten in my lap. Because even though he hadn't said anything outright, I knew what that moment had been, and it scared me more than anything. But the craziest part was that the story wasn't over. Jason didn't come back right away. I could hear him rummaging around in the kitchen. Cabinet doors opening and closing, a faint clang of something metallic, the fridge humming louder as it cycled on. I stayed frozen on the bed, still cradling the book in my lap, though the words on the page had long since blurred into meaninglessness. My fingers traced the frayed edge of the cover, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, still spinning around that single offhand question he had asked me. And, more dangerously, the way he had looked at me when he did. Do you ever think about things being different? Could have meant anything, but it didn't feel like it meant nothing. When he finally returned, it was with a bag of chips in one hand and 2 bottles of soda tucked under his arm. He nudged the door open with his shoulder, stepping inside like this was his room, too. Like this was his space to occupy whenever he wanted. And in some ways, I guess it was. Jason had never respected personal boundaries, not because he was inconsiderate, but because the concept of them didn't really exist in his world. He was the type who hugged too long, who leaned in close when talking, who borrowed your hoodie without asking and then forgot to return it. He was always touching casually, confidently, and I had spent years teaching myself not to flinch every time he did. Here, he said, tossing me one of the sodas without warning. I caught it just in time, the bottle cold against my palm. Thanks, I murmured, my voice still a little tight. He flopped back onto the bed, twisting the cap off his drink and taking a long sip before offering me the chips. I shook my head, and he shrugged, crunching noisily as he reclined beside me again. His shoulder brushed mine and I stiffened slightly, but he either didn't notice or didn't care. So he said, between bites, "What were you reading that had you looking so intense?" I blinked at him. Intense. Yeah. He glanced at me with a faint smirk. You looked like you were about to cry or punch someone. Or both. I looked down, thumbing the corner of the page. It was a sad part. Jason studied me for a moment, and then, to my surprise, he didn't make fun of me. He just nodded slowly, as if he understood even if he didn't know what it meant. What happens? He asked. In the story. I hesitated. It's about two people who are in love but can't tell each other. His gaze didn't leave mine. Why not? Jason sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Something he only did when he was overwhelmed. Everything. You, me, the way I feel when I'm around you lately, it's like… He shook his head. It's like I want something, and I'm afraid that wanting it will ruin everything. His voice cracked at the end, just slightly, but I heard it and it nearly undid me. For the longest time, I had told myself that this us could never be anything more than what it already was. I had buried the way my heart skipped when he brushed past me in the hallway, the way I memorized every detail of his laugh, the way I always hoped he'd choose to spend the evening in my room instead of his own. But now, with him sitting just inches away, looking at me like he was waiting for permission to want more, I didn't know how to protect either of us anymore. What do you want? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Jason blinked. What? I forced myself to meet his eyes. You said it feels like you want something. So, what do you want? The silence that followed felt infinite. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers like he didn't trust them. Then, slowly, like every movement took effort, he reached out and laid his hand on top of mine. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was small, tentative, his fingers just barely brushing mine, but the weight of it was crushing in its intimacy. He didn't look at me, not right away, and I didn't pull away. I couldn't have if I tried. I don't know what this means, he said softly, but I know I don't want to stop whatever this is. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could feel the tremble through my hand. I stared at our fingers, at the way they didn't quite intertwine but hovered close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. And something in me, something long, buried, and aching, finally broke free. I don't want to stop either, I said, the words escaping before fear could steal them. Jason looked up, then really looked, and I saw it. The relief, the fear, the uncertainty, but also something else. Hope. Hope so raw it made my chest ache. He moved closer, not all at once, but in inches, careful not to move too fast. His thigh brushed mine, and I didn't flinch. He studied my face like it held answers he'd been too afraid to look for until now. Can I try something? He asked, his voice low, tentative. My breath caught, but I nodded. And then he leaned in slowly, hesitantly, giving me time to pull away, to stop him, to make it clear that this wasn't what I wanted. But I didn't. His lips brushed mine so softly. It was more a question than a kiss, just a breath, just a whisper of contact. But it was everything. The world didn't explode. Nothing dramatic happened. But my entire body responded like I'd been waiting for this touch my whole life. My eyes fluttered shut, and I leaned in just enough for him to understand that this wasn't a mistake. Jason deepened the kiss, still gentle, still unsure. His hand slid from mine to the side of my neck, his thumb resting just below my jaw, grounding me. I felt his breath, his hesitation, the way he was trembling as much as I was. It wasn't a kiss born from lust or desperation. It was careful, curious, like two people trying to navigate a language they'd never spoken before, but somehow already understood. When we finally pulled apart, we didn't speak for a while. Our foreheads rested against each other's, breathing the same air, hearts pounding in the same uncertain rhythm. I'm scared, Jason whispered, eyes still closed. Me too, I breathed. But I think that's okay. He nodded slowly, his hands still on my neck. I don't know what happens next. We don't have to figure it all out tonight, I said. Just stay here for now. Jason exhaled a shaky breath that seemed to release weeks, maybe years of tension. He pulled back slightly to look at me with something close to awe. I don't want to pretend anymore, he said. Then don't. We didn't kiss again that night. We didn't need to. Instead, we lay on the bed side by side. No touching, no speaking much, just existing in the same space, breathing the same air, letting the silence stretch between us like something sacred. The book I'd been reading was forgotten. The story on the page no longer mattered because the real story, the one I never thought I'd get to live, had just begun. The room was dim now, lit only by the golden haze of street lights slipping through the blinds. Jason's breathing had steadied beside me, but I could tell from the occasional shift of his fingers against the comforter that he wasn't asleep. Neither was I. Sleep felt like something that belonged to a different version of us. An earlier one before confessions and unspoken feelings turned to whispered kisses in a quiet bedroom. I had my eyes closed, but I wasn't pretending. I just didn't know what to say. There was a fullness in my chest, a weightless pressure that wouldn't go away. I didn't know if it was joy or fear or some mix of both. I was terrified to move, afraid that if I shifted the wrong way, he'd retreat, convinced it was all a mistake. Still awake, Jason's voice broke through the silence, soft but clear, and it jolted something in me. He was close, closer than he'd ever been in this way, and his voice sounded different now, like he was feeling everything just as intensely. "Yeah," I murmured. "Couldn't sleep," he said. He rolled onto his side, and I felt the movement in the mattress. The air between us thickened. Then, without warning, his hand reached out and touched my arm, his fingers barely resting there. It was the kind of contact that should have meant nothing. It wasn't even a real embrace, but to me it felt seismic. "I've been thinking," he said, his breath fanning across my cheek, "about how long this has been in the air between us." I turned my head, eyes opening slowly to meet his. He was staring at me like I was something he didn't quite know how to hold but desperately wanted to. His expression wasn't playful or teasing. It was vulnerable, open in a way I'd never seen before. "You mean tonight?" I asked. Jason shook his head slightly. "No, before that. Way before. You ever look back at old memories and realize they meant more than you thought?" I nodded, swallowing the tightness rising in my throat. "All the time," I said. "Like that time we stayed up all night watching dumb horror movies in your room and you ended up falling asleep on my shoulder," he said. "And I didn't move. I didn't want to." I blinked, stunned. That night had haunted me for months. I remembered the weight of his shoulder beneath my cheek, the way I'd pretended to sleep just so I wouldn't have to move away. I chalked his stillness up to comfort or laziness, anything but choice. "You remember that?" I asked. "Of course I do," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That was the first time I realized I was looking at you differently, and I didn't know what to do with that." I shifted, my breath catching as our knees brushed. "Why didn't you say anything?" Jason smiled faintly. "Because I was scared. I've always been the guy who has it all figured out. Girls, sports, parties. I played the role so well that I started believing it myself until you. My heart was pounding now, but I didn't interrupt. Couldn't. You were always just there," he continued, "reading your books, rolling your eyes at my jokes, making me think about things I didn't want to admit. You made me feel safe, and that scared the hell out of me." I reached for his hand, then did it without even thinking. Our fingers met, and this time they didn't hover or brush. They laced together, firm and certain. "You don't have to be scared," I said. Jason nodded, but his eyes didn't leave mine. "I know, but I still am. Not because I don't want this, God, I want this, but because I don't know how to be this. I don't know what it means for me." I squeezed his hand. "It doesn't have to mean anything right now. You don't need a label. You just need to be honest with yourself, with me. That's all." He let out a shaky breath, then shifted even closer. His leg pressed against mine. His body curved toward me like the question he was still asking. "Can I kiss you again?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just leaned in. This time there was no hesitation. His lips met mine with more certainty, more pressure. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a declaration. His hand cupped my cheek as our mouths moved together, slow at first, exploratory. Then something shifted, something deep and buried pushed up to the surface. The tension between us. All those stolen glances and lingering touches over the years, all the jokes that weren't really jokes, the closeness that always skirted just on the edge of something more. It all snapped. His kiss grew deeper, hungrier. My fingers slid into his hair, and I felt the quiet groan at the back of his throat as his other hand slipped to my waist, pulling me closer, anchoring me to him. We broke apart only to breathe, our foreheads pressed together as we panted in the darkness. His hands were still on me, firm and unrelenting, like he was afraid I might disappear. "I don't want to stop," he said. I shook my head. "Then don't." We moved together again, mouths colliding with a passion I hadn't expected from him, especially not tonight. But it wasn't just desire, it was years of repression crashing through the walls we had both built. Jason rolled half over me, our legs tangling. His body pressed against mine in a way that erased any distance we had ever claimed. And yet, in the rush of it, he was still careful. His hands roamed like they were memorizing, not taking. Eventually we went even further and did the thing. To be honest, it hurt quite a bit. But still, it was amazing because we were doing it together. I ran my hand down his back, feeling the taut muscle beneath his shirt, and he shuddered against me. He looked down at me. Then, eyes dark and uncertain but still locked on mine. "Are you okay?" he asked. I smiled breathless. "Yeah. Are you?" He nodded, then kissed me again. Slower this time, more deliberate, like he was no longer trying to figure out if this was real, but how much of it he could let himself feel. We stayed there, wrapped around each other, the boundaries between friendship and something far deeper completely erased. It was clumsy in places, overwhelming in others, but it was real. And when we finally settled, our bodies molded together in the dim light, Jason whispered, "I've never felt more like myself than I do right now." I kissed his temple and held him closer. Neither of us had answers, but in that moment, tangled up on my bed, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just some passing mistake, it wasn't confusion. It was the beginning of something real. A couple hours later, the morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long lines across the sheets and illuminating the soft rise and fall of Jason's chest beside me. He was still asleep, his arm draped loosely over my waist, his face pressed into the pillow just inches from mine. I could feel the heat of his skin, the steady rhythm of his breath, and the weight of everything we'd shared just hours before, lingering between us. I hadn't slept, not really. I'd spent most of the night watching him, thinking about how surreal it all felt, how something I'd only ever allowed myself to dream about had actually happened. And not just the kiss, the touches, the confessions, the way he had held on to me like I was something he needed to anchor him to the ground. Even now, I still couldn't quite believe it. Jason, my best friend, my straight best friend. Except, was he? I turned slightly, just enough to study his face in the soft light. He looked peaceful in sleep, almost boyish. His lashes were long, his jaw slack, lips slightly parted as he murmured something incomprehensible. I wanted to freeze this moment, to live in it before the world crept in and made us question everything again. But time was cruel. It always moved forward whether you were ready or not. Jason stirred. His arm tightened around me briefly, his nose brushing my collarbone as he shifted with a groggy sigh. Then, slowly, his eyes blinked open. He looked at me, confused for a second, like he wasn't sure where he was. Or maybe he just wasn't sure this was real. His gaze softened as recognition dawned. "Hey!" he whispered, his voice thick with sleep. "Hey!" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Pause hung between us. I saw him searching for words, and hated the distance. "Okay?" I asked. He hesitated. "Yeah, I think so. I don't want you to think last night was a mistake." Surprised, I said, "It wasn't. Jason, I meant it. Everything. I'm still figuring it out. But I wanted to." The knot in my chest eased. "I don't expect you to have it all figured out. I just needed to know you wouldn't regret it." I regret not doing it sooner." He touched my cheek. "I've been scared of ruining us. But last night felt like relief." I turned to him. It did. Like breathing. We stayed there, hands entwined. New yet natural. I'd imagined awkwardness. But it just felt like us. Later, Jason stretched. "I should text Sam. Tell her it's over." My stomach tensed at the intrusion. "You sure?" "Yeah. No more pretending. You don't have to do everything at once. Let this be ours for now." He smiled, kissing my forehead. "I like that." The morning was quiet, intimate. He grabbed his keys. "If I freak out later, remind me it felt right." I nodded, hugging him. "I will." He kissed me, fragile and precious. See you tonight. Definitely. He left, smiling back. Everything changed, yet stayed the same. Jason still raided my fridge, teased me, left socks everywhere. But now, fingers brushed, gazes lingered. He pulled me close and no labels yet. Too early. But real moments told us we didn't need to rush. His breath on my neck, coffee and a shoulder kiss. I missed you. And yes, we did it again, slowly each time another layer peeled back. Still questions, doubts, but he stayed, choosing me quietly. And I let him take my hand, building something real.